Welcome to a virtual trip through France. We're not going to hit all of France. We're going to touch on Burgundy, Normandy, and Brittany. This is a bit unusual for us. Phil and I usually make two, three, four, six trips to places before we put together a program. But in this case, we've only visited France once and only to one area, Burgundy, and that was in November last year. So we have some help from friends of ours, David Desrochers and Suzanne Bennett Johnson, who shared some of their images with us, which we're presenting to you, and we'll identify them. And although we did do the research and put the storyline together, so that's ours. So anything we say wrong, that's us.
We're fortunate in that we have friends who are gifted photographers, so their images work really well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what makes France France. First of all, there is the arable land. It has the third most arable land in Europe after Russia and Ukraine, as it happens. So they grow a lot of crops, and you can see that this is mostly lowlands, all the green. Even the uplands, other than the mountains on the border, have plenty of arable land, so they grow a lot of crops. They're really well populated with navigable rivers. So you have some major rivers, the Loire, the Seine, the Meuse, the Rhine, and many of them are connected by canal. Not many, but some of the major, the Loire and the Seine drainage systems are connected by canal. The Seine and the Meuse are connected by canal. So it's a very integrated transportation network for the crops. And in the center of all that is Paris. And Paris is in the center because, as you can see, the river network in Northern Europe converges in and around Paris. And I'll go in the next slide, I'll go into a little bit of why that is. One further aspect is that the borders, for the most part, are quite secure. You have a major river, has a border on the east, the Rhine, then you have the Alps, then you have the Mediterranean, then the Pyrenees, then the Atlantic, then the English Channel. So it's protected from invasion, which in general is important, as we know, on most sides except for the north. And in particular, the broad plains of Northeast Europe have allowed, well, in 1870, in 1914, and in 1939, when France was at war with Germany, this is exactly how Germany invaded. And in fact, on many occasions over the centuries, France has talked about extending to its natural border, which would be the Rhine River. And other than when Napoleon went past the Rhine River, it has always been at its current border. So that's pretty much what makes France France.
Yeah, one thing we didn't say when we start, Phil and I have a format for these, and what you'll notice is that we like to do a presentation to slides as we're doing, and then we'll do have some images to music following it, and then we'll take questions and answers at the end. Okay, I forgot
through the chat.
through the chat box. I forgot the housekeeping.
Okay, Paris. So why do all these rivers converge in and around Paris, which allows Paris to really monitor trade throughout the entire country, at least on the rivers? There's a geological formation called the Paris Basin, and you can see that all of the rivers kind of go into the middle of the Paris Basin, in the very middle of which is Paris. And Paris formed where it was in part because it has two large islands in the middle of the Seine. And those form natural moats for the ancient French tribes and then the Romans after them. And they built fortifications that gradually extended out in concentric circles. And the boulevards of Paris. These are the inner boulevards. These are the outer boulevards. So the boulevards tend to follow the fortifications of Paris in concentric rings that get further and further out. And most of Paris is actually built on the floodplain of the Seine. So that's why Paris itself is where it is and how it's structured. And then we'll show you some pictures.
Okay. So the Paris vicinity and Normandy photos are courtesy of our friend David Desrochers. So here we have an image of the Eiffel Tower. It's an iconic symbol of the city of Paris. It's an iron monument. It was built between 1887 and 1889 and was based on the design of the engineer Gustave Eiffel. He designed the iron framework of the Statue of Liberty, that part that's inside that holds the outside. And to celebrate the French, it was built to celebrate the French Revolution centennial year, and they were having an exposition universelle at the Champ de Mars, showcasing France's industrial abilities. And this was pretty common at that time in Europe. I know the United Kingdom, Great Britain had one not far from then, and around that time. So it initially served as the entrance or the gateway to the International Exposition in 1889. So one place people really go in Paris is to the Louvre. It's the most popular museum in the world, and it's visited by about 10 million people per year. And most of those visitors go to see the Mona Lisa.
The problem with that,
Oh, wait, but also don't the image on the right, well, the image on the left is the Mona Lisa or a picture of it, and an image on the right is a picture of the Louvre itself, and you see the pyramid that was added in by it is designed by the architect I.M. Pei and completed in 1989.
that is the main entrance to the Louvre. So everybody's going to see the Mona Lisa. However, there's a problem with that, and the problem is this. You don't, it's very difficult to get close to the Mona Lisa. It's not large. It's only 30 inches by 21 inches. And this is a typical photo you can get of the Mona Lisa from about 9 or 10 rows back. So most people who go to see the Mona Lisa leave unhappy, as our friend David and his wife Kathy did.
So the Desrochers then went to Monet's garden at Giverny, which is about 50 miles west of Paris. And Monet worked on this garden from 1883 until his death at the end of his life in 1926. And our friend David was hoping to photograph one of the Japanese bridges at the garden.
The problem with that is this. If you go in high season, you can't get anywhere. I mean, look at that mob. You can't really get close to anything. You can't take a picture of any of the bridges without, 200 people on each bridge. So if you do go, we'd encourage you to go perhaps in one of the shoulder seasons, spring or fall. If you go in the summer, forget about it.
So hundreds of thousands of people visit this garden every year.
In 2023, which was when I believe Kathy and David went, 800,000 visited this particular garden. I think it's the most visited. No, it's not the most visited. We're a different place is the most visited spot outside of Paris, but this must rank pretty high.
But it wasn't all crowded. I mean, usually the Seine is very crowded. It's a heavily trafficked river, and it meets the sea at Le Havre, and it links to the Rhine and Loire through the canals Phil mentioned. But this was our friends David and Kathy, but it's not them, but it's a picture of them on the boat or the ship cruising along the Seine. So this looks really peaceful and calm.
This to me looks like fun. The Louvre and Chiverney with the crowds anyway, I could do without.
You could do without every city, Phil.
I'm not a city person. Okay, this is Chateau de la Roche Guyon. And if you speak French, please excuse our pronunciation. We're not native or even semi-fluent French speakers. I can count to 10. It's in a strategic spot overlooking a crossing on the Seine on the route to Normandy. And you can read this, talks about a few miserable openings. This is the original castle. And if you look, it's carved right into the cliff. There are very few windows because, of course, if you're attacked, everything had to be fortified. People can get in the windows. So they make the windows as scarce as possible and as high up as possible. This chateau was built much later. The castle was built in the 12th century. The chateau, I believe, was built in the 18th century, and it was Rommel's headquarters in World War II.
And even in small villages, like in the Burgundy countryside, we saw homes and stores that were built up to or into the walls of the fortress. And then Kathy and Dave moved on to Normandy. And they were particularly interested in going to see the Normandy beaches, which were, it's between Le Havre and along this area here, facing the English Channel. It's Normandy is named after the Norsemen, the Vikings, who invaded and occupied the area in the 8th century. And then they converted to Christianity and they became known as Normans. In 1066, William, the Duke of Normandy, conquered England and he became William the First. So one reason people visit Normandy, of course, is to visit these beaches, the Normandy beaches of D-Day of World War II.
Becky's father went in the beach at Normandy on day 4, in fact, World War II.
And okay, so these are some shots that David took from the beach, from Normandy Beach. The one on the left is the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial, and it contains over 9,000 graves. It's located on the bluff overlooking the Omaha Beach and the English Channel. And on the right is a sculpture called Les Braves, the Brave People, by Honoré Bonin, to honor the courage of the men who landed on the beach during D-Day and sacrificed their lives in hope of freeing the French people.
Okay, now we're going to look at a set of photos by our friend Suzanne Bennett Johnson. And Suzanne's photos are primarily of Brittany with just a little bit of Normandy from Mont Saint-Michel in this here, right in the gap here, that little indentation. Brittany is the end of it's a peninsula, um, a lot of carved rocky coastlines, heavily indented with cliffs and capes. It really is the end of a mountain range, a heavily eroded mountain range, mostly of granite.
Brittany's a medieval feudal state from 1939 until 1547 and has a strong Celtic heritage. Traditionally, it's the homeland of Breton-speaking people, but at the end of the 4th century, and then also into the 5th and 6th century, Britons from Cornwall, that southwest peninsula of Great Britain, began to emigrate into Brittany. Their migration was to get away from and escape the Anglo-Saxon invaders. And the major economy in Brittany is fishing, agriculture, and tourism.
The flying sheep of Pontorson. You go to Pontorson because it's really close to Mont Saint-Michel, and it's famous for its sheep. The sheep graze on grasses that are high in salinity and iodine content, so they have a certain flavor to them. You can consider them pre-salted sheep. So you get pre-salted lamb when you dine in the restaurants there.
Okay. So then just over the Brittany border in Normandy is Mont Saint-Michel. It's a major Christian pilgrimage destination, and it's a Benedictine abbey that was built by the Dukes of Normandy, and it's on a granite outcrop. It's a tidal island, actually, where the abbey is accessible at low tide, and it's about 17 acres in size. It's visited by more than 3 million people each year, and the most visited tourist site or tourist attraction in France outside of Paris. Its highest point is only 302 feet. The tides vary by 46 feet between low tide and high tide. And the parking is on the mainland, about a mile and a half away. You can walk or use a shuttle to get there, to cross the causeway. And in 2014, they built a bridge to get there. So we have two views of it. We have a closer up view of it, and then a nice, more minimalist view of it in the fog there in the bottom.
You'll see some more really beautiful scenes of this in the set of slides set to music at the end.
Another place is the Duke of Brittany's castle. That's this picture here. The Duchy of Brittany is a medieval feudal state. that existed approximately 939 to 1532. And not on the bank of the Loire is where it's located. It was previously fed, the moat there was previously fed by the Loire. Um, it was built in the late 15th century by Francois II. He was the last Duke of Brittany. And it's the original castle, though, has been demolished to build the present castle. The castle was built to defend the feudal state against the French king. They were independent. They didn't want to be part of France at that point. And it was the residence of the Dukes of Brittany at that time, or up until the 16th century. But after Brittany was integrated into France in 1532, so during the 16th and 17th centuries, the Chateau de Duc de Breton became the residence of the kings of France whenever they visited the area. And later it was a military barracks, an arsenal, and then a prison.
And now it's a tourist
And
attraction.
now it's a tourist attraction. Fort National, so we're making our way along the coast here. Fort National is a fort on another tidal island, and it's a few hundred meters off the walled city of Saint-Malo or Saint-Malo. It's the great military, it was built by the great or designed by the great military architect Vauban, and it was built in 1689 for Louis XIV. It was to protect Saint-Malo, the port. And the island was originally the site of a beacon that lit at night to serve as a lighthouse. And then it became the site of public executions. And originally it was called Fort Royal, which name, of course, didn't really ring very well or go well very well after the French Revolution. So Port Royal then became the Fort of the Republic in 1789, and eventually Fort Imperial, and finally Fort National is the new name as of 1870.
We have a series of Suzanne's photos of lighthouses. Her photos of Brittany, by the way, uh, I like so much, and Becky does as well, that we've signed up for a photography trip to Brittany next year. So we'll probably eventually substitute our own pictures for Suzanne's, but these are just gorgeous shots. The Cormovan Lighthouse, built out of granite stones, granite quarried in the area in 1849 on a rock at the tip of the Cormoran Peninsula, connected by a granite bridge, as you can see. And it's the westernmost lighthouse in France. When aligned with other lighthouses, it gives the directions to two different channels into the harbor. Phare de Pontousval. Phare simply means lighthouse. First lit in 1869. The rocky Brittany coast, by the way, the reason you have all these lighthouses is when you get a rocky coast, think, for example, of Maine in the United States, you wind up with a lot of shipwrecks. And so they had all these lighthouses to signal, where the land was so that ships could get a reckoning of where they could sail safely in that rocky area. Pontousval comes from the Breton contraction abyss where the beast was drowned.
And there's legends about the beast and the drowning of the beast. Okay, and here we have another lighthouse, St. Matthew's Lighthouse and Abbey. Um, the lighthouse was built in 1835 within the walls of the abandoned abbey, and it's 37 meters tall. But originally there was a light in the tower of the abbey itself. And the monks were offered for their services, for having the light there, they were offered services in exchange where they had the right to the goods from the ships that were wrecked on their property. But the sea captains complained that the light wasn't regularly lit. So matters were taken into hand and they have the new one. And along with the I don't know.
Kermovan.
Carmarvin, thank you, Marvin. The Carmarvin Lighthouse, this is one of the lighthouses that's part of the signal for the Channel de Feu. De Feu. The Petit Menu, the little kitten house, lighthouse. It was placed on a rock jutting into the bay, as many of them were, and it secures the entrance to Brest Harbor, and it's next to the fort. The building next to the lighthouse, on the right of the lighthouse, is the old unused traffic light tower from the Navy.
15 main ports that unload about 300,000 tons of fish per year. Nearly half the fish in Brittany, I'm sorry, half the fresh fish in France are from this area. And photographers love to go there and photograph these fishing structures. Farming and fishing are the uh, main sources of income in Brittany, as well now as tourism.
And then there are the mussel beds, more of the fishing industry. Brittany and Normandy are the largest mussel farming sites in France. Normandy is larger, more so than Brittany. What they do here, and what this is a picture of, it may not be obvious, it wasn't to me. The larval mussels are caught naturally on ropes. And the ropes then are wound around wooden stakes. And what you're seeing are pictures of lines and lines and lines of these wooden stakes with ropes. They're about 8 feet tall. And the mussels are out of the reach of crabs and other predators. So each stake can hold about 175 pounds of mussels free of sand or parasites. So you can imagine that's quite an industry.
Okay, now you get into our photos. And this is where we went. We flew into Paris. We had a car service pick us up at the hotel and drive us to Burgundy. It was about a 3.5 hour drive, and we stayed right about here, truly in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, when the driver picked us up, he said to us, "Why are you going out to the middle of nowhere?" Most of the people he picked up stayed in the Paris area, I would guess. But we'll tell you why we went. Uh, but we stayed with a couple. The husband is a photographer, and the wife is a chef slash chocolatier. So it was a nice combination. We took a number of day trips, including probably the furthest one was to the town of Beaune. And as you'll see, this is what's called the Côte d'Or, or the Gold Coast, or the Gold Scarp, or the Gold Slope. And it's where very intense red wines are grown, some of the best wines in France. So some day trips in this area itself around Le Creusot and where we stayed, and then a further trip to Beaune. So we flew into Paris, the City of Lights. Now, I said to myself, why is it called the City of Lights? I mean, it is true. It looks beautiful when you fly over it, but any city looks beautiful when you fly over it. It's called the City of Lights because at the beginning of the 19th century, it was the first city in Europe to use gas lighting to illuminate its streets, hence the name City of Lights. So why were we going to middle of nowhere? Here we are. This is Becky and me, our friend Suzanne, who was with us on this trip, another photographer, and our host, Neil Benvey. Neil is a photographer, and he and his wife run food slash photography retreats. So we stayed with them for a week in rural France, a nice little cottage, beautiful grounds.
We stayed in their attic.
We stayed in their attic, which is finished, has its own bathroom up there, but it was cozy. Uh, and their place is called La Soumet, and I wondered what that stands for. And this is what, and I tried to research it. I tried to Google it. I could find absolutely nothing. So I asked Neil himself, the our host, and he said it comes from Les Sarmates, which is a nomad people from Central Europe installed in Roman Gaul in the 4th century AD to serve as auxiliary cavalry. And a number of settlements in the area have names that were derived from that nomadic tribe that were the cavalry of Rome.
Okay. And the other reason why we went for Charlotte's cooking. As Phil said, Charlotte is she's actually an award-winning chef slash chocolatier. And And we also had the option to cook with her well, we were more sous chefs than anything else, and to go out to the and shop with her. Well, Suzanne and I did that. Phil did not. Phil did eating. Phil was eating. That
I,
was his specialty for this part.
I went for the photography and the eating.
But wait, let me point out some things. So up here in the upper right, she's showing us her pavlova, which she meant the pavlova she made for us. Wonderful with all the meringues and the fruits. And down in the lower left is an apple tatin. Basically, it's an upside down apple pie, and this is before it's turned over. So you're seeing the bottom, the top, which is the crust, but when it turns over, obviously that becomes the bottom goes on the crust. And we had all kinds of delicious food. The other thing about staying with Charlotte and Neil, and we've noticed this before when we traveled with them, the nice thing is, and especially since it was only three of us, we were able to work with them and um, and really negotiate, well, when were we going to eat? How many meals were we going to eat? Because we were going out photographing. If we went out, we usually went out to photograph really early in the morning. And then, since we were getting up early, we didn't want to have a late dinner. So Charlotte really accommodated us on that. And I felt for her because Neil scheduled the next group, the next two people to come in the same day we were leaving. We were leaving, and that afternoon, the next two women were coming in, and Charlotte was going to do it all over again.
It's hard work.
It was hard. But we did go shopping with Charlotte, or at least Suzanne and I did. And we wanted to go see what their markets were like. And we were looking for the unusual foods that would be different for us. And of course, on the bottom, you see the pig's heads. And we asked Charlotte about, she says, I wouldn't cook pig's heads. Sorry, I'm not cooking pig's heads. I said, that's okay. And I was also interested in the eggs. Even at home, Charlotte did not put the eggs in the refrigerator. And in the supermarket, they're not refrigerated. And I thought, well, why do we refrigerate ours? Well, it turns out eggs are coated with a thin protective membrane that prevents bacteria from penetrating the shell. And this natural membrane makes refrigeration unnecessary, except washing eggs is done commercially in the US and removes the protective coating. So thus we put ours in the refrigerator.
While they were cooking, I was in the backyard photographing. And these are some yard birds, beautiful birds, European goldfinch. And you can see that similar to our own goldfinch, they like thistles. They eat the seeds from thistles. This is very characteristic. Our own goldfinch, in fact, in Pennsylvania Dutch, are called thistlefinches. So thistles are a big part of their diet. Blue tits, very similar to our chickadees. They're certainly in the same family, the Paris family. These are Paris. I forget which Paris they are, but the great tit is Paris major. And it was a lot of fun to go in the backyard. Certainly for me, at least, a lot more fun than cooking. I'm not much of a cook, but I did, whoops, I'm sorry. I
So,
did enjoy photographing the backyard birds.
something for everyone.
Something for everyone. Bocage country. Bocage simply means farmlands with large open fields separated by hedges with sunken lanes, sunken from hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of years of traffic, carts, and eventually, of course, cars that go through them. So the lanes are sunken. This is called bocage country. It's beautiful country, beautiful farmland. And in fact, it's very similar to the terrain around Normandy. And it created a lot of difficulties for the Allied forces when they came in on Normandy, because the open fields, the forces formed good targets for the Germans who were hiding in the hedges, and the sunken lanes, when the tanks went down into the lanes and came up the other side, it exposed the thin armor on their underbellies and made them easy targets as well. So it was very challenging in the Normandy area, but it makes beautiful country to visit now.
Okay. While we drove throughout that area of Burgundy, and we were on many little roads, a lot of the roads, when they came to a crossroad, had either a crucifix or a cross. a marker in the road. And this, I mean, this could have been on a little dirt road as well. We've seen it on some dirt roads. So traditionally, these were used as way markers, maybe sacred places for travelers and locals. Early Catholic Church held ceremonial blessings at these sites. And the cross was significant in many cultures, including the pre-Christian cultures like the Gauls and the Celts or Celts. So it depicts the intersection, and for some, like pre-Christian, it depicted the intersection between this world and next, or they could mean it's the entry to a village or a town, or it could be a place to ward off evil for that village or town. So there were a lot of those around. So one of the reasons we went, and one of the reasons we went in November, was because of the birds that would be there. I mean, Phil would only go if there were birds. So we were there because this was the time when the common Eurasian cranes came back, and they came to feed on the cornfields that had been cut down, just like we have the sandhill cranes around us in our area in New Jersey. Sandhill cranes come in the winter to feed on the crops that have been cut back. It's a widespread crane. It's throughout Europe, and it's one of the few cranes not threatened by extinction. And also, we saw the white storks there. Phil and I had seen white storks in their migration down in Africa, so this was a chance to see them up in Europe. Um, and they're fairly widespread, and they avoid as you can see by the migration pattern in the lower right corner of this slide, they avoid the Mediterranean Sea when migrating. They try to go overland the most they can.
These are the storks that carry the babies around Europe
Yes,
in the little diapers. They
diapers.
fly. That's their day job.
Mhm. We didn't see any of that. One of the other things we saw now are the Charolais cattle. And they're the second most numerous cattle breed in France after the Holsteins, which are dairy cattle, but these are beef cattle bred for their meat. And then the most common beef breed in France, and the name for the geographic area in France where they were first bred, the province of Charolais, or Charolles. How do you say
I'm
it?
not sure.
Okay.
Okay, we were in Burgundy, so of course we wanted to go see the wine growing area, and that was in the town of Beaune. And this is the Côte d'Or, the Golden Slope. And I don't know the first thing about wine. I mean, my taste in wine hasn't really progressed much beyond, Boone's Farm apple wine.
That's not true.
So I did a little research online to find out why this area is famous for wines. And apparently, wines like cold winters, hot summers, they like a fair amount of sun, and it has a very gentle eastern slope. You can see that they're grown mostly on this eastern slope of this elevated area. And it's got a gentle eastern slope, so it gets both the morning light as well because of the gentleness of the slope, some afternoon light as well. Mix of limestone and clay, and I can tell you from walking around in that area, it has plenty of clay. We were covered with kind of goopy mud from all the clay, but apparently it's just the right amount to give a good balance of nutrients, moisture, and drainage. So as I said, it's known for its intense red wines. It's really a prettier. I mean, you can see that this looks characteristically like the French wine region. And I'll play you just a short video here.
Can they hear it?
Yeah, we can't hear that. I hope you can hear the bell ringing. Yeah, I see a couple of nods. Uh, but it's just wonderful atmosphere. You're out in the country, you're out in the vineyards. This church bell is ringing. You're looking over the vineyard down into the town. It's a really pretty setting, and you can see Becky hard at work here.
After we visited the vineyards, we went off to the medieval town of Boone. It was a Saturday and it was market day, and it brings in a lot of tourists even in November. We weren't there a little too late for the market. It was closing up because we didn't make it there till like 1 o'clock. We were famished, but it's a it's a key wine French center. So it holds the annual wine auctions. It's surrounded by the vineyards, as you saw, and it's where the best vineyards are situated. So this was a cold day. I mean, you saw the fog in the morning and you saw how where we were dressed.
And you can
And
see how we're dressed here.
and because the restaurants were overflowing, there were so many people, we were going to wait a long time or we could eat outside. And we decided to eat outside and we put all our layers back on to eat outside. We had fun anyway. And then we after that, we went and took a tour of the town. I mean, a tour meeting. We walked around town taking images of the town.
And we put together, I think the one on the left is Becky's, the one on the right is mine. We put together little, we call them chocolate bars, little segments of just shots of different angles and different locations in the town that we've put together to kind of illustrate the full town. It's a walled medieval town, so the buildings are old. It's interesting to photograph.
I can tell the one on the left is mine. It has my signature here. It has the grid. This was looking down on the pavement. There's a grid for the telephone utilities.
Becky did software for the phone companies for her career.
So I often check out phone booths and other things. And then we went to the Basilica of Our Lady. It's a 13th century church. It's one of the last great Romanesque churches in Burgundy. But after a fire in the late 1200s, they replaced the stained glass windows with Gothic windows. And that's what you see here in these pictures. These are Gothic in style. They're not Romanesque. And the chapels, like the one Suzanne's photographing in on the far left, they were added over time from the 13th to the 16th century.
It's a beautiful building. We enjoyed photographing it.
We wanted to go see into the Hotel de Beaune, the Hospices de Beaune, and it was founded in 1442, as you can see on the sign on the left. And it was considered one of the finest examples of 15th century Burgundian architecture. Well, it still is considered that. And you can see the gold-plated or finials on the building on the left, and you can see all the beautiful tiles in the roofs on the right.
We couldn't get in though. I mean, the line was, it would have taken us hours to get in, so we photographed what we could from the outside. These are chocolate bars put together of the chateaus. You find a lot of old abandoned chateaus in Burgundy, and I was wondering why, so I did a little research on that. Some of the causes are obvious. As it went from an agrarian farming society to more of an industrial society, the big cities like Paris sucked the jobs out of the countryside. So the areas that were farming became more abandoned. They had fewer jobs and made large properties difficult to maintain. Also, it was very difficult to adapt these very large old structures to modern levels, modern codes, building codes, and levels of comfort. And the third reason was one that hadn't occurred to me. France has very high inheritance taxes. So the inheritance taxes were so large on these enormous estates that they tended to be subdivided or abandoned. And in many cases, they were abandoned. So you have these old abandoned chateaus dotting all around Burgundy, and we went to photograph them. It's what's called urbex photography, photographing these abandoned old buildings.
Now we didn't go into the buildings, but you'll see why for some of them. So first we went to Chateau Pierrefitte in Morvan.
It's an old hunting lodge built in the 1800s that burned down, and the current chateau was built in 1912 along the same lines. You can see an early postcard of the site, probably from the early 1900s. This one is I found even more interesting. Not only do you have a chateau building, but it's an entire community. I mean, they had a church. You can see the chapel on the left. They had workshops. They had a pit where they used to bring in the carts and the buggies to clean them off. Everything to have an entire community there on the site. I mean, the grounds were enormous.
Makes you wonder how many people it took to run a place like this. And then some of the chateaus are still occupied, or at least some of the buildings are occupied. Generally, not all of the chateau is occupied, maybe certain wings of it, and maybe some of the outbuildings are used. So this was one that was occupied. And actually, what we really went to see is the little chapel in the woods on the left. But what we ran into was we saw this other place. And so I'm photographing the chapel and Phil's done photographing the chapel, and he and Neil run down to photograph parts of the chateau. And the owner of the chateau comes out and she says, "Privé, privé." It's the only thing I really understood.
Yeah, we don't know
We,
much French, but we can understand privé. She wanted us out of there.
so we left.
And another time we were caught trespassing on a farmer's field, and he came out with his pitchfork to chase us away. Now you don't believe that, do you? This is actually the father of our chef. This is Charlotte's father, who happens to live in I mean, this is rural France, but her parents moved to this area as well. They live about 5 or 6 miles away. And he's a wonderful model. I mean, I said to him, look stern, because I wanted him to look like the couple in American Gothic, that famous painting. And I thought he did a pretty good job. So we were practicing doing portraits, in this case with natural light.
And in this one on the left, it was with flash. Neil set up several flashes to use, but the one on the right, I believe, is also natural light. He loves birds and bird watching, so we figured this was him in his natural element.
He was a naturalist, I think, in Scotland
Oh,
before,
yeah, they did. He was
the forest
forest
ranger,
ranger or
something
something
like
like
that.
that. Mhm.
That is the end of our PowerPoints. And now if you'll sit back and relax, I have a very short, I think 3.5 or
Okay, you got to give me a moment. I got to unplug the.
it's the middle one.
Is it? I got the right one? Nope, that's not it. I got yeah, microphone.
Okay, so 3.5 minutes of France slides set to music, again with some help from our friends David Desrochers and Suzanne Bennett Johnson.